Hello, listeners. The catalyst for tonight's episode was one of those short and rather clinical notices from my province's police force warning that a high-risk offender had been released and was living in our community. I'm sure you've seen similar things in your area and know exactly what I'm referring to. In this case, here in Nova Scotia, the latest warning concerns a man named Doug Worth, and the advisory offered only the barest details about his release conditions and gave no sense of the horror that had kept him behind bars for the past 25 years. When we started digging into Doug Worth's history, what we found was one of the most barbaric murders in Canadian history. The 1987 murder of 12-year-old Trina Campbell, and the grotesque lengths that Doug Worth was willing to go to try to conceal what he did to her. In this episode, Madeleine Klein and I will explore who Doug Worth is, how he was finally caught, and why his release raises unsettling questions about public safety. Let's get into it.
Douglas Worth, a federal offender, is now living in the Dartmouth area. Worth has a criminal history dating back to 1968 for offenses including rape, theft, and breaking and entering. But it was the 1987 murder and dismemberment of a young girl in Brampton, Ontario, that landed him a life sentence until now.
In Canada, life in prison really doesn't mean life in prison. The vast majority of offenders will be released.
Ms. Madeleine Klein, I'm talking to you from Nova Scotia, where we are under a dryness lockdown. You're not allowed to go in the woods. There's signs everywhere that say do not go in the woods. And when you walk on grass, it crunches beneath your feet because we haven't had rain since I don't even remember when. And the whole province is terrified that someone's jeans are going to rub together too tight and a spark is going to ignite this entire place. How are you doing?
Better than Nova Scotia.
I hope so. You have had wildfires this year, right?
Oh yeah. It's and it's still pretty smoky some days here, and up north is still on fire. I think I heard on the radio today there's still 86 active fires and 14 of them are out of control or something.
Wow.
Where I am, which is Regina, I feel like we're getting lots of rain this summer, but we don't need it here. We're just getting the smoke, and the places that need the rain aren't getting it. So
these are very apocalyptic problems to have. But aside from weather and dryness and the risk of fire almost making things feel like it's like the early COVID era, there's other problems. The RCMP in Nova Scotia recently released a press release warning residents of a high-risk offender living in the area. I'm sure you've seen these before. I'm going to start the show by reading the press release that was sent out, I guess probably about 2 weeks ago at this point. Halifax Regional Police are advising citizens, particularly those in Dartmouth, that a high-risk offender is residing in your community. Douglas Worth, 73, is a federal offender who's been serving a life sentence for second-degree murder. The murder took place in Brampton, Ontario in December of '87. Worth has a criminal history dating back to 1968 that includes offenses of rape, break and enter, theft of motor vehicles, and prison breach. Worth is bound by several conditions, including no contact with children or his victims, no drugs or alcohol, and all of his relationships must be reported. The release of this information is in accordance with the Nova Scotia release of High-Risk Offenders Information Protocol and is meant to alert members of the public of his presence in the community, but is not intended to encourage any form of vigilante activity or any other unreasonable conduct. You've probably seen, messages like this be spread of high-risk offenders being released in Regina, I assume?
all the time, in fact. And
Yeah.
I always thought it was like a Regina thing. Maybe it's just because I don't get out much. But I guess they are releasing high-risk offenders all across this great country of ours.
It seems so, yeah. And it's very upsetting when you see someone is at a high risk to reoffend, yet they're still released. But I guess that's our justice system. You can apply for parole. If you get it, you are released with these strict conditions, and you're generally, there's some kind of checks and balance to make sure you don't harm people. If you don't get parole and your 25 years comes up and your sentence ends, you get released from prison and you seemingly walk out of there. And the story we're going to be talking about tonight, this has happened twice to this man. He was released in prison for a horrible crime back in the 80s. He committed another horrible crime, and he's now being released in 2025 and living not too far from where I am, and it's pretty concerning because you read this press release about him being released and you hear his horrible history, but it only gives you like a glimpse at what he's done. This guy is a literal monster, and it's shocking to me that I've never heard of his crimes before, given his connection to Nova Scotia. He's referred to by some as the Pictou Sadist. That's the place where Jack and Lily Sullivan went missing from. So we've been talking about Pictou County a lot on this podcast. The man we'll be discussing tonight, Douglas Worth, he's originally from that neck of the woods.
Well, and as soon as so you shared the police press release that he's, living in Dartmouth and he's from Nova Scotia, et cetera, et cetera. Terrible guy, right? Horrible. But then, as you kind of mentioned, as we find out more about his horrific crimes, it makes me wonder, like, what makes an infamous or notorious crime or murder? Because when you read about this guy, what he did and the whole story we'll go through, it's like, how is this not one of the most well-known people in Canada?
Yeah. When you read the press release, it describes him of getting out of prison for second-degree murder with offenses like rape and break and enter. But what they fail to mention is when they arrested him for the second-degree murder, he had a child's head in a bag in the back seat of his car. And that should be in the press release. Like, when you're warning the public there's a bad guy there, I think that's an important caveat to the whole thing.
It's a very important and big detail that they're just kind of leaving out.
Yeah, but a Google search for this guy will tell you the horrific story of Douglas Worth. But I'll save you the Google search and we can talk through it tonight. What we both have done is watched a documentary about Douglas Worth. It was actually really good. It was on YouTube and it was called, it was a series called Crime Stories. It seemed like it was an old television show, and they did one episode titled The Pictou Sadist that, tells the story of Doug Worth's crime, the one that put him in jail that he recently was released from. And it's one of those documentaries, or whatever you want to call it, where it's all reenactments, and that can be a little cringy at times, but overall this one I thought was pretty good.
It was, those can be pretty weenie, but I enjoyed this one as well.
But let's get into it. I figure what we'll do tonight is just talk through the story of Douglas Worth, starting in the beginning, leading right up to him now being a free man living in Nova Scotia and concerning a whole lot of people that know his story. Let's jump into it and learn a bit about him by traveling back to the mid-1970s and hearing about his first serious crime. There are going to be two crimes he's committed against children, both very similar, but one far more severe. Before he was convicted of second-degree murder and found with a head and a bag in the backseat of his car, he was also charged with a serious, violent rape. I'm going to play you a short clip that gives some background on his background and the first crime that landed him his first long prison sentence.
Doug Worth, at that point in his life, was a career criminal. He got in trouble for the typical young person sort of issue, car theft. His record increased from there. He started traveling the country, ended up in Ontario, and there was a serious sexual assault, a rape in Ontario.
What he had done in that instance was to have basically grabbed a young woman and had dragged her into the back of a truck and had strangled her with a belt. In fact, what he had done was brutally and sexually attacked this young woman.
It really bothers me that you can grab, like, you hear these nightmare stories of someone grabbing someone and yanking them into a car, like brutalizing them. Luckily, this child that he grabbed, it was actually an 8-year-old kid. She survived this, but I feel like if you do that once, you should be locked away forever. Whether Canada wants to have a lax justice system or not, you don't get better from that.
Child rape is just a different level of horrific.
Yeah. This guy, already a monster. Despite doing this, he gets an 8-year prison sentence, which I believe to be very lax given a violent sexual assault against a child. I feel like I just can't accept that. And I have a feeling other people who hear what happens next won't accept it either. Doug Wirth gets an 8-year prison sentence after being convicted in that sex crime. During his time in prison, he only gets worse. He becomes increasingly more unhinged. He harbors a deep resentment against the government, against society, against the justice system that put him behind bars. It seems like he almost felt like he was the victim by being put in jail for 8 years for this crime that he was found guilty of.
He would have outbursts where he would be involved in throwing urine and feces at other inmates as well as at correctional officers. In one instance, in his possessions was found a newspaper clipping that reported on the Yorkshire Ripper that had terrorized England. And he had written on that article that this would be my greatest fantasy come true. He declared that he was going to wreak havoc on society as revenge for the years that he had spent in prison. He declared that he was going to go to a schoolyard and with an axe chop up children. He declared that he was going to make the notorious serial murderer Clifford Olson look like a choir boy. He was doing everything to show that he should not be released into the community.
So you have the type of guy who can grab a kid, an 8-year-old off the street, pull them into a vehicle and do the most horrible things imaginable to them. Goes in prison for 8 years. And as we just heard, it's like that monster seems to become a supervillain while in prison, hell-bent on getting revenge on society, including they have evidence of him saying, I want to bring an axe to a school. It's terrifying.
It is. It's just like, it's mind-boggling how he wasn't even trying to hide it.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, he still, under Canadian law, had to be released because he did his time.
Yeah, and that's the thing is he, by not hiding it and doing all this crazy stuff, that would make him never get parole, of course. But his sentence was 8 years. So he serves the full 8 years. And at the end of it, he's a free man to just walk out of prison. And this is a big problem for me because if he got parole would have, let's say he has his 8-year sentence. If he gets out on 5 years, it would be with these strict conditions. So he'd be on parole for the final 3 years or whatever of his sentence, and he'd have to check in with somebody and all this stuff. Since that doesn't happen, when his 8-year sentence is up, he's a free man to walk out of prison with no checks or balances in place to prevent him from doing the horrible things that the prison officials thought were highly likely that he was going to do.
I'm surprised he wasn't deemed a dangerous offender.
Well, the prison, for whatever reason, Douglas Wirth was not deemed a dangerous or long-term offender, which would have given him an indefinite sentence and kept him behind bars. They did try to have him declared criminally insane, though, which would have put him in a position where either he didn't get out of care or he would have had these conditions put on him when he was released.
In other words, they were so concerned, they sought expert opinions to determine whether or not he was, as a result of his mental disorder, someone who was a danger to himself or others and should be involuntarily committed for that reason alone. The mental health professionals who saw him took the view that the mental disorder that he suffered from was not one for which they had any treatment. They diagnosed him as essentially being a psychopath.
It was determined that those conditions in and of themselves wouldn't permit him to be detained in a psychiatric hospital.
But the law is the law. He served every day of his sentence and to the minute, and they let him out. They had to.
So it sounds like what they were trying to do was release him from prison, but build a case for him being released from prison and instead going into a mental health care home, I guess we can call it. I don't know what they would have called it in the 80s, but it seems like they tried to do that. Turns out he was diagnosed with something they couldn't treat anyway. So yeah, just put him out on the streets.
Which is like outrageous. But it's, yeah, and maybe it's like a blessing in disguise they didn't declare him criminally insane, because had they done that, and maybe at one point he did get out, he could be found not criminally responsible for his future crimes.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So it's, yeah. And like, it's not illegal to be a psychopath as long as you don't act on your lack of empathy and, normal emotions.
Yeah, and that's a part of like the dangerous offender or long-term offender classification in Canada is you need to like repeatedly do these crimes. In this case,
Like, isn't this
Doug
enough?
Worth, yeah, like Doug Worth grabs this 8-year-old kid, pulls her into his vehicle and does this stuff to her. But I don't know if that one act is enough to make you a dangerous offender. It needs to be like a repeated thing. But maybe their Hail Mary was like, if we can at least keep him safe or keep everyone else safe by having him declared insane and, maybe getting him in, it was basically they're trying anything they can to avoid just releasing him because they know he's such a problem.
Yeah. There's no way that the dangerous offender suggestion didn't come up when they were trying to figure out how to keep him in.
Yeah. They try everything, but as we just heard in that clip, his sentence is up and he's a free man. In June of 87, he decides to move back to the city of Edmonton. That's the city he was living in when he actually grabbed the 8-year-old and committed the sex crime against her, which that alone kind of surprises me. Often if someone's getting out of prison for doing a horrible thing, they live somewhere else after that. Like they wouldn't just return with no good plan to the same place they did this horrible thing. But again, talking about the prison trying everything they could to protect society against Doug Worth, the prison even called the Edmonton police and said, just so you know, we've tried everything we can to get this guy off the streets. It's failed. He's your problem now. He's in your city.
Oh.
Watch out for Doug Worth. And they do watch him. When Doug Worth arrives in Edmonton, he reconnects with someone named Mary Kelly, who seems to be like an ex kind of girlfriend or romantic partner that he had several years prior. He gets in Edmonton, he moves in with Mary Kelly and her teenage son, Sean. And this trio, Doug Worth, Mary Kelly, and her son, Sean, are going to become the main players in the story we're going to talk about today. They form this kind of, I guess, just toxic, horrific family. It's a violent situation where Doug is said to be horribly abusive to Mary Kelly and to her son, Sean, as well. She's often injured with black eyes and as a result doesn't want to leave the house. She becomes isolated. Sean is terrified of Doug. Mary's terrified of Doug. And they just live this cruel life. But something leads to him leaving Edmonton for greener pastures. He leaves Edmonton and goes to Brampton, Ontario. And that's where the horrible crime we're going to be discussing takes place. But we should talk a little bit about his arrival in Brampton and what his life was like there without Mary Kelly, his girlfriend, and Sean Kelly. Because again, it seems like he just leaves the house and goes there on his own.
Yeah, I was kind of unclear on that part. It's like, what made him leave by himself and like to such a random place?
Yeah, it is kind of surprising.
I'm sure there's info missing, but
oh yeah, a whole lot missing, because it's one of the problems in this story is the police were unable to follow Doug Worth. They didn't have a mechanism in place to monitor him. They knew he was in Edmonton. They didn't know he left for Brampton, and the Brampton police knew nothing about him. They had no idea that a monster had moved to their community and was living in like a rooming house. So he was basically anonymous in Brampton for several months. Whatever the plan was and whatever the reason he left Edmonton to go to Brampton was for, Mary Kelly and her son Sean were involved in some way, because they eventually come and live with him after a couple months, and the three of them get a place together. But we should talk a little bit about Brampton. It's a city that still, but more so then, had a lot of social problems. It was known for poverty, low income, and a sizable transient population. So there was a lot of people coming and going. People like Doug Worth, who would show up in town, live in a boarding house or a low income kind of rental place, stay for a little bit and bounce. And that makes it very hard to keep track of everyone's coming and goings for police. And like I said, the Brampton police had no idea Doug Worth had ever been there. They didn't learn until they were investigating an unsolved homicide and got a tip from outside of the province.
Well, and even if the record keeping was better back then, it was super easy to give someone a fake name and stay under an alias.
Yeah, certainly.
It was pretty easy to fly under the radar.
Yeah, and when you talk about like rooming houses or boarding houses where it's like, a big place divided up into units, it's not like this formal lease with a background check. It's like,
No.
Here's $40. All right, you're good for 2 weeks. It was
Pretty
that kind
much.
of arrangement. And he was just this Doug Worth was just this creepy man living in this house with a bunch of other strangers coming and going from it. No one knew who he was, other than he just seemed like a weird, quiet, kind of messy looking guy. But there's a whole lot more to it. Let's take our first break, and when we get back, we're going to learn about the second child that Doug Worth victimized in the story. It's a child named Trina Campbell. She's a Métis girl from Saskatchewan who, at the time she runs into Doug Worth, was living in a group home in Brampton. So before the break, we teased the next player in this story, a Métis girl named Trina Campbell, who was living in a group home in Brampton. But she has a rather dark story that leads to her being one of the many people that passed through Brampton. Her time, though, is going to have a very tragic end. Let's learn a little bit about Trina Campbell.
Trina Campbell was a little girl, 12 years old. She had a series of problems in her life, problems that were not of her doing. Her parents had a number of significant issues to the point where she ended up having to live with foster parents. Trina was troubled because of her past. So Trina had run away from the foster parents. And she'd run away a series of times to the point where they became concerned that they weren't able to control her.
It was felt that the best thing for Trina would maybe to sort of distance her from the family a little bit, to give her a more structured setting. So they put her in a group home. She was placed in a group home in Brampton.
Trina was 12 years old, and I used to say she was 12 going on 10, as opposed to a 12-year-old who was streetwise and sophisticated. And she wasn't any of those things. She was very much a little girl who just needed love and attention.
That sounds like a vulnerable person when you hear that.
Yeah, poor little thing.
Yeah, it's often when you hear someone, run away and in and out of like care and foster families, you often hear they're streetwise.
Yeah.
They've said like all but the opposite. She was a little girl who acted like an even littler girl. And to have that kind of characteristics about yourself and not have the safety net of like, a family structure, that's vulnerability.
Yeah, when I was watching this documentary and it was said, Trina was 12 going on, and then he paused. I was waiting for him to say like 18, but no, she was the opposite, which is so terrible.
Yeah, it's Doug's first crime that gave him that 8-year sentence was an attack on an 8-year-old. Trina was a bit older. She's 12 years old. Here's how this story goes. Is on Friday, the 11th of December of 1987, after school, Trina gets on the bus from school to get the ride back to the bus stop near her group home. She's seen getting on the bus. She's seen riding on the bus. She's seen getting off the bus at her regular stop, but she's never seen again after that. So this is a Friday afternoon into the evening. But given her history, as we just heard there, she's known as a runaway. She ran away several times from her foster family, said to have ran away several times from her biological family. It's reasonable to think when she doesn't show up at the group home Friday evening, maybe she ran away. That's something she was known for. So initially that was the assumption, but they had no idea where she was. But one of the issues in tracking her down is she was fairly new to Brampton. She was only there a short period of time, so it's not like she had a bunch of friends and family that they could check on. She hardly knew anybody, so she all but vanished, leaving behind a serious question of, did she just run away, or did something different happen here?
Well, and she was originally from Saskatchewan, and she had expressed how she missed her dad and wanted to wanted to see him again. So they were like, well, did she run away back out west? They weren't even sure if she was in the province.
They took it seriously in Brampton investigating her. They had posters put up everywhere. They were trying everything to track her down, but they got nothing. Not a single clue, not a single sighting that could be corroborated in any way. They had no idea where she left, and they also, the police, had no idea that Douglas Worth was living only a couple blocks away from where she was last seen. And again, we will continue to dunk on the justice system, but the fact that he was released without any kind of monitoring, despite the prison trying to do everything they could, that's such a shame. And it's like, you could say this 12-year-old Trina Campbell was falling through some cracks in society, but Doug Worth seemed to be standing at the bottom of those cracks in society, just gobbling up what fell through. That seems to be what happens in this case.
Unfortunately, the domino effect of the flawed justice system in this case is just abysmal. Trina, yes, was, in the system and, like you said, kind of slipping through the cracks, but it should have ended up a lot differently for her.
But things will slowly start to change. So we just discussed how Doug was alone in Brampton. Trina Campbell goes missing. There's no sign of her. But Mary Kelly and her son Sean in Edmonton do arrive in Brampton eventually. And the three of them start living together again. But Doug's a little bit different than when he was living with Mary and her son Sean in Edmonton. He was said to be showing signs of paranoia and often referencing things about the police wanting to get him, or his fear that they were going to try to find something, some kind of crime to stick on him. I think everyone listening to us right now probably knows what he was worried about. He certainly didn't tell Mary what happened, and he certainly didn't tell Mary that he was involved in any kind of serious crime. But he did tell Mary, there was something I was involved with, and I need to cover it up. I need you to help me rent a car. I got to move something related to a crime. It's a bunch of guns that if I get caught with them, I'm going to be in trouble.
He had told Mary that he had some guns stored in a ravine area, that if he were caught with these guns, that they would cause him, of course, a great deal of problem. He left the car with a hockey bag and went into this ravine area. He then was seen by Mary to come from there carrying this hockey bag that was now laden with something.
I think Mary asked some questions, but due to the type of relationship that they had, I think she was somewhat reticent to ask too many questions.
Asking someone to rent a car and help you move a bunch of guns, that is very sketchy. And as we talk here, there's going to be a question of, does Mary Kelly have any responsibility for what happens? But at this point, what we know is Mary Kelly believes it to be her helping her boyfriend move guns that he had hidden in like a ravine, and he puts them in a hockey bag, puts them in the trunk. They drive somewhere else. He gets out of the car, takes that hockey bag of what she thought was guns and brings them into the woods and rehides them.
I have so much sympathy for her son, Sean,
Mm-hmm.
Because the relationship was terrible back in Edmonton, right? And just imagine the relief Sean felt when Doug screwed off to Brampton, Ontario. And then the absolute, like, earth-shattering decision. Mary says, we're going to move on over to Ontario with that awful guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like I understand there's a lot of variables, and you were free. Why did you swan dive back into this guy's life?
Yeah, and not only is Sean now back in a house with the monster Doug Worth, it's going to get even worse for Sean, because when Doug and Mary do this whole thing with moving the bag of, and I'm using air quotes, firearms from one place to another, when they get home with the rental car, there's a nasty stain in the trunk, a nasty dark stain. Doug tells Mary and Sean that it was some kind of fluid, transmission fluid, that was spilled. And he asks Sean and his friend to clean up the car, try to get any sign of that mess in the trunk out of there.
No, he tells Sean and his friend to clean
Yeah,
up.
did I say ask?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there was no asking. Sean and his friend do it, but they, despite being kids, they have concerns about this. It has a foul smell, and it's not, brown and oily. It's red, and they're fairly certain it's blood right from the beginning.
Oh, Sean's onto him right away. Mary, girl, I'm never one to victim blame because I realize that, beaten and battered women stay for a vast amount of reasons. The spectrum's broad. But she's being willfully obtuse. Like she knows that there's something not right about this. And she's just like, oh, okay, like it's transmission fluid. I'm just gonna believe him and like be quiet about everything. Ugh, girl.
Yeah, it's tough, and her role in this. I don't know if you've ever seen a photo of Mary Kelly. She is looks like she lived a terrible time with Doug Wirth. I found only one or two photos of her online, and in one of them, she has two big black eyes, and she just looks like she has had enough. That's how I'll put it. But let's move on. Sean and his friend clean the car. It's a rental car. Mary returns it to the rental agency, and coincidentally, after that, Doug wants to leave the Brampton area. He wants the trio to not go back to Edmonton, not stay in Brampton. He wants to move far east to Nova Scotia, where he's originally from. He wants to move to the Pictou County area of Nova Scotia. They end up doing that in late '87. And it's Doug Wirth who has family there. When he arrives home, unlike in Brampton, and for the most part in Edmonton, people in Pictou County, they know who he is. They know what he did. They know about his prison time. His family especially is terrified of this guy and very concerned that he's back in town because some of them know how big and how bad of a monster he is. But the three of them arrive, get a place, and I guess with plans of forgetting about those guns he had to move in Brampton and start over, I guess is what they want to do.
Like all the locations in this story are so far away from each other.
Doug, Mary, Sean come to Pictou County, reconnect with Doug's family. Things slowly begin to fracture and fall apart for the Pictou sadist, Doug Wirth. It wasn't long after his arrival to Nova Scotia that he was at like a dinner event with his sister and his brother-in-law. Doug Wirth had a couple drinks and seemed comfortable to tell them about a crime that he committed back in Brampton. But I think what he tells them is the heavily whitewashed version of what he did.
There was discussions where Doug was bragging about killing the man in Brampton and how he had got into an argument with him, beaten the man, broken his leg, and how he wasn't going back to jail for anyone, so he had to kill him. He had no choice. He just had to do it. Doug was pretty open about what he had done and trying to rationalize it, that it was, what he had to do because they were all family and they all had to stick by him no matter what.
I killed a man. I broke his leg and I had to kill him so he didn't say anything. I'd still be like, you broke his leg? Like, that's no reason to kill him. Like, you're not going to... It's worse now. You made it worse.
I imagine the brother-in-law looked at his wife and was like, see, this is why I didn't want him to come over. Like, please don't ever invite him over again.
That's it. But whatever they felt or said afterwards, they didn't contact police to let the police know. Maybe they thought he was BSing. Maybe they were terrified of this guy. They didn't. But the police are going to get another opportunity to learn about Doug Wirth and the horrible things he did. And this is a big kind of coincidental thing that puts everything in motion, really. You expressed your empathy and your thoughts for Sean, who was Mary Kelly's son, who was pulled into this horrible life with Doug Wirth. When Sean's in Nova Scotia attending school, his teachers and the guidance counselor at the school, they notice as well that like there is something wrong in this kid's home. He has bruises. He is unhappy. He's not doing well in class. He's a mess, and we need to intervene in some way. what they end up doing at the school, and this is amazing that this happened and that it worked out the way it did. But the guidance counselor, a social worker, as well as a police officer from the Pictou area, all got together and pulled Sean into a meeting. And they just want to talk to him about his life and why things seem to be, why the writing on his face seems to suggest things aren't right. And Sean all but breaks down and tells this audience of professionals who are looking out for his best interest just how horrible life is with the monster Doug Wirth.
He was quite upset, sobbing, and it took quite a while at various times to calm him down, just to get him speaking again. He showed signs of having been assaulted. He had bruising about the face and red marks. He felt that eventually, if he didn't get away, that Wirth would kill both him and his mother. He indicated to me at various times that he had overheard a conversation Wirth had had. Wirth had admitted to them that he had killed somebody.
The officer from Stellarton, to his credit, said, well, that's all well and good, but this man says he's killed a man in Brampton. And if he says he's killed somebody because in his estimation, he's that type of person.
Yeah, so the police, the Stellarton's a community in Pictou County. The police there, they're familiar with Doug Wirth, and they hear Sean say he killed a guy, and they say, they think, yeah, he's the type. If Sean's saying he did it, he's the type to do it. He definitely did it.
I just want to point out, a round of applause for this guidance counselor, because had she, I'm just assuming it was a woman, I could be wrong, had she not orchestrated the social worker and the policeman to show up and talk to Sean, this case may have never been solved. She got the snowball rolling.
Certainly. And it began rolling fast. The police in Stellarton, they think, if this guy said he killed someone, he's the type to do it. He did it. So what they do is the Stellarton police in Nova Scotia, they call up the police in Brampton and they say, we got a guy here. He's a monster. He'd been living in Brampton and he's telling people he killed a man. The Brampton police go through their database. There is no unsolved murder of a man. So they think it must be untrue or somewhere else, but he didn't kill a man here. We don't have any unsolved male murders. So it wasn't, taken that seriously. It was also, it's coming from a kid who overheard someone say that they did this. So the police don't really take it seriously. But the police in Nova Scotia, that's different. They're like, the Brampton police may not have a missing man, but this kid is telling us that this guy said he killed someone and this guy is a monster. So there has to be more to it. What they do, the police in Nova Scotia, in Stellarton, the same cop who attended this meeting at the school with Sean, the guidance counselor, and the social worker, despite the Brampton police not being concerned, he keeps pushing. He meets up with Sean for a second interview outside of the school, asking more questions. And it's at this point that Sean really puts things in motion. And he tells the cop, I just overheard him say killing a man, but there was this other odd experience I had. Doug got me and my buddy to clean up the back of this rental car. This fluid leaked in it, according to Doug. But when we cleaned it, it stunk and it was red, and we're pretty sure it was blood. So now we have some information. We now have some evidence to go on. And that justifies a second call to the Brampton police from the police down in Nova Scotia. Now we have this monster here who says he kills somebody, and his girlfriend's kid says they made him clean the back of a rental car. And that's enough fuel to get the Brampton police to at least look into it a bit more.
So this is some stellar police work right here. Look, RCMP, especially Nova Scotia, have fumbled the bag in the last few years. But this is unbelievable.
Yeah, they're making it happen.
Yeah.
The police in Brampton, they contact the rental agencies and they could find no car rented to Doug Wirth, but they did find a car rented to Mary Kelly. They found out where the car was, and a police officer and a forensic examiner go to the car to take a look in the trunk and see what's in there.
Well, we got the keys from the fellow that was renting the car at the time. We went down to the car. and we popped open the trunk. There was a stain, dark, just a dark stain. The story is starting to come together, that maybe it's not a drunken bravado by someone out on the East Coast, that there's some credence to it. And he pulled a couple of tufts of hair, or of carpet fiber out of the trunk, brought it up to his office and tested it right away. And he says it's human blood. And not only is it human blood, it's decomposed human blood. The person that lost his blood was already dead. And the blood type was rare. So he says it's rare, but it's very common among Native Indians, this blood type.
There was no indication at that point that it was connected to the disappearance of Trina Campbell. But at that point, Trina Campbell was our only long-term missing person. The scenario didn't fit, but we still felt that there was a loose chance that there might be a connection.
So things are really cooking now. They know something's going on. They look in the car, they find not only human blood, but decomposed human blood of someone with an Indigenous background. They still, though, think they're investigating the murder of a man. So things aren't put together quite tightly yet. But what their next step is to look into Doug Worth's background. And again, remember, he just got out of prison not too long before this for an 8-year prison sentence. The rape he was convicted of an 8-year-old, that was an Indigenous girl as well. And there was other things in his background that seemed to suggest he preyed on young Indigenous boys and girls. So this line of thinking is eventually going to tie him back to Trina Campbell. We'll follow along with that after this break. So now that they have a bit of a read on Doug Worth and his interest in young Indigenous girls, and thinking about the potential he could possibly be responsible for the missing 12-year-old Indigenous Trina Campbell, the police in Brampton partner closely with the police in Nova Scotia, and they begin to surveil this guy. Basically like private eye style, sitting in cars, watching him roam around, go about his business, and they just see how he interacts with people. And he is basically a super creep, and it's clear they need to get him off the streets.
So even while we had Doug Worth under surveillance, he was seen following, watching young Native Indian girls, which was all the more motivation for the RCMP and the Pictou police to say, anything you need, anything you want, deal with this.
Because at this point, we're in a quandary as investigators. We know that we really truly do need a body. We need, if this is true, if this is what's happened, we know we need to be able to find that body.
So back in Nova Scotia, the police are now speaking to people connected to Doug, specifically his sister and brother-in-law, the ones that he haphazardly told about him murdering some man back in Brampton.
That Sean and that seems to be what Sean overheard, is when at this party or this family supper, when Doug told his sister and brother-in-law that he killed the guy, Sean must have overheard that. But initially they don't go to the police. When the police come to them while they're there surveilling it, they again say no, like we don't want to talk about this.
And I can see it. I can see why they would say that, but I'm not in that situation, and I don't know anything about their family dynamic. But like, to you and I, if someone confessed murder to us, I don't know about you, but I'd be skipping down to the cop shop.
Yeah,
like, I don't want any part of this.
Yeah, and even if I didn't skip down to the cop shop and tell them like that day or the next day or something, when the cops showed up at my door a couple weeks later asking questions, I definitely wouldn't be like, I don't know nothing about anything. I want nothing to do with this. I at least can explain it then. They initially turned the police away, but something led to them having a change of heart. Again, Doug's sister and brother-in-law, they think he may be involved with murdering a man. For some reason, they have a change of heart, and they agree to meet with the cops and talk about it and allow an interview. When they do sit down with police after probably a night of talking, like, should we talk to them? Should we not talk? Should we cover for this monster? They decide to meet with the police. When they do, they spill the beans. Doug was here. He talked about killing a guy. And they also go on further to describe he's been weird ever since. He seems paranoid. He's often talking about the police are onto him or are trying to have him put away again. And a grisly detail is Doug had told them, and they're telling the police now, that one of the things Doug said is the only way I can get away with this is if I go back to Brampton and separate the head from the body and hide the head somewhere separately. So that way, if they find the body, they can't identify who it is. It's one thing to tell people I killed a guy, but could you imagine someone telling you, and now I need to go back and remove the head and hide that separately or destroy it so I don't get caught? I would have gone to the police 100 times about this.
Right. And that just makes me think. And I have this feeling about absolutely everybody in this story, whether it's Doug, Mary, Sean, the sister, and the brother-in-law. I'd love to know a little bit more about their like family history.
Mm-hmm.
Because if my brother-in-law sat down and is, just kind of nonchalantly telling me that he not only killed a guy, but he's now scared of getting caught and he wants to go move the remains, hide a head.
Yeah, moving the remains is awful, but removing the head and moving it separately, that's the only thing worse than moving remains. It's a horror show.
Right. So he utters that statement, and the sister and brother-in-law still aren't like jumping out of their seats to report it. I'd love to know like what else in history has happened in the backwoods of Nova Scotia that alarm bells aren't going off immediately. It takes the cops coming to them.
Yeah, seriously. But in this case, again, they still think it's a man, the murder of a man that they're talking about. The police want a body. They need a body. They need proof if they want to stick this on Doug and get justice for Trina. But they know that they need help from people close to Doug. And that's why they lean heavily on Doug's sister. They reveal to her that it isn't a man that Doug killed. It was a child, and they're going to want her to get involved in getting him caught.
I suppose we kind of went out on the limb a little bit at that point in sharing our belief that, in fact, Doug Wirth had not killed a man in Brampton, but had killed Trina Campbell. We were very strongly convinced that it was Trina Campbell that he had killed.
I think what turned her around was the fact that she had already had Doug babysit her daughters, who were, one was 12. So very much like Trina Campbell, and then she realized she just had to, as a mother, she had to.
Could you imagine that moment when they reveal, that man, he said he broke his leg and he had to cover it up so he killed the guy, now he wants to move the head. Then they slide like a picture of an innocent kid across the table. It's like, it's a 12-year-old girl.
Same age as your daughter.
Yes, that he was babysitting recently. I can every question I have about her and why she did what she did are all a mystery except for this one, because when this happened, she's like, yeah, I'm in. Let's get this guy.
Okay, yeah, but why would you let your child rapist brother watch your children?
Yeah, even without the murder part.
I have an issue.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, she may not. Well, actually, your child rapist brother who admitted to you that he killed a man, at least. That alone, it's not like killing a man is so less than killing a kid. You're like, yeah, you can still babysit.
Right?
Like if you killed a human being, then you're not babysitting my kids. That should be.
Yeah. It's just, there's so many questions. And like I said, I'd love to talk to these people because they're like, I think it'd be very fascinating.
Mm-hmm. It would be very interesting. So at this point, they know that the police believed Doug killed a kid. Doug's sister and brother-in-law are willing to get involved in having him be caught in the act. This case has some good police work, and what they do here is actually pretty amazing. What the police arrange is, Doug is talking about wanting to move the body and move the head and all this stuff. We're going to get you a rental car. We'll arrange for you to have a rental car. We're going to give you some money. We want you to tell Doug you agree that that's the best thing to do. Go to Brampton and move the body, and we'll just follow him along as he does it. And she does it. So she goes and talks to Doug, and she says, Doug, you can't get caught for this murder, and you did what you had to do. Hiding the body or moving the head or whatever it is you want to do, that's the best outcome here. I'm going to get you a rental car. I'm going to give you some money. You go do it, and We'll all live a beautiful life after this. And he convinces Mary to do it with him. So Doug and Mary hop in this rental car that he believes his sister got him, using some money for gas that he believed his sister gave him so that way he could, put this horrible thing he did behind him. They hop in the car and they make the 20-hour drive from Nova Scotia to Brampton without stopping for any overnights. At one point, the police are trailing them the whole time in like unmarked cars and stuff. At one point, they stop at a hotel and the police are like, oh, thank God. Like they're finally, taking a break and we can have a rest. Doug gets out of the car. He walks into the hotel, but he ends up somehow knew, I guess, that there was like a bar in the hotel. So he goes into the hotel. He goes to the bar, sits down, has a drink, hangs around for 15, 20 minutes as Mary waits in the car. Then he goes back out and sits in the car and they continue on the way to Brampton. 20 hours of straight driving with a group of police officers in unmarked cars keeping an eye on them the whole time. That is a pretty complicated web to weave.
But yeah, like kudos to the police work, especially the like interprovincial effort that this took.
Yeah.
And handing it off. Yeah.
Yeah. As they're going from one province to another. Yeah. And that's what they did, because as they go from one province to another, a new force would continue the surveillance. And the way it is, if you're trying to follow someone, you can't go too close or get too far back and lose sight of them. So this is an elaborate game.
Well, and he was already paranoid. So they had to make sure like he wasn't on to them. It's great that he was never on to his sister of, being undercover essentially. But yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. They follow him. He eventually makes his way all the way to Brampton, and he's driving down some rural roads. And that's when things really get interesting, because when they're in, if you're on the highway, it's one thing to be, 5 cars back and keep an eye on, the silver vehicle up, half a kilometer ahead. But when you're on like dark roads at night and there's only a couple cars around, following him would be incredibly hard. So what they have is a bunch of police officers pulled over with their cars and lights off, using binoculars to just try to follow the lights of Doug's car in the distance. And for the most part, they're able to keep an eye on him. But overnight, they end up losing him somehow. They know he's close to the body. He's in the right area. They think they're so close, and they lose him. And that must have been so disheartening.
Oh, imagine all of that work. And they were like, I think it's crumbling. It's all crashing down.
Yeah. We've been following this maniac for 20 hours, and we lost him at the last moment. The police spend the nights in the hotels themselves, thinking, the next day we're heading back to, wherever it is we're from after this long drive of following this guy. But they decide, before we wrap this up, let's scope out the area that we lost him, see if we can find anything. And I think it's like 5 cop cars that head out there to this remote area outside of Brampton. And what do they see but the absolute perfect moment to arrive? They see the rental car parked on the side of the road with nobody in it. On the side of the road, they don't like pull up or anything. They just kind of drive past. And as they drive past, they see Doug in the act.
Doug was carrying a dark gym bag. I'll never forget that sight and that just immense wave of relief that washed over myself. And when we saw the car parked there and then saw Douglas Worth coming out of the bush carrying a gym bag. He didn't seem to pay us any mind.
At that point, we knew, we knew he'd probably done what we'd intended him to do, go to the body and recover the skull.
Now the question is, when do we make the arrest? So you think of any possible excuse or story that he could possibly tell in a court of law.
We didn't want to give him the opportunity to say, I found this and I'm turning it into a police station. I'm going to come into the police station.
So we followed him and we let him drive right past our headquarters in the city of Brampton, so that there's only one last place for him to go, and that's back on the 401 home to Nova Scotia. So we felt now was the time.
So this is amazing. So they're driving by, they find the car empty. As they're passing by, they see Doug and Mary walk out of the bushes, and Doug's holding a bag. It's like, couldn't be better timing.
Could you imagine the adrenaline?
You'd be exploding. And then, but the restraint they have to show, they'd be so excited. They could jump out and arrest him now and catch him with the head of Trina Campbell in this bag, certainly. But they let him get back in the car and continue to drive because they don't want to give him any excuse. Because he could say, "Oh, I was just, going to pee and I found this thing and I'm going to take it to the police station." Like they're doing it so he has no explanation. They let him drive away, drive past the police station and get back on the highway. So there's nothing else he could say other than, "I have this head and I'm on my way back home to Nova Scotia." That would take some restraint. It's disturbing to say, but the police are about to score a touchdown and they know it.
Well, and they've also seen firsthand awful people get off on technicalities like that. So they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's. So,
yeah,
which is great.
Yeah, they wait till he gets on the highway, is outside of Brampton on the 401, which is a major highway in Ontario. He's driving back to Nova Scotia, and that's when the police do what they got to do. The cops surround him, put on the lights, stop their cars, pull them over, and Doug and Mary get out of their cars.
No, it was 5 unmarked police cars.
Yes.
That they slowly got him to stop and barricaded him in.
Yeah, they surrounded him and just slowed down.
Yeah.
He knew.
Which is brilliant.
Yeah, he knew what was happening though. He gets out, he doesn't even say a word. He's just like,
"What do you say?
What do you say?" And
what do you say?
And I don't think she said anything either. Both of them initially were arrested and charged. The cops didn't even look in the car. They're like, the medical examiner is going to go in there because they know damn well what's in that bag.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. No surprise when the medical examiner does look in. It is Trina Campbell's skull or head in a bag in the car. So not only do they get him, to catch a killer in that fashion, literally with the head of the victim in his car on the other side of the country, is just amazing.
This is why I'm so surprised that this case isn't one of Canada's most well known. Mm-hmm. It's just such a wild ride from start to finish. It's horrific and sadistic and just terrible. And the police work is 10 out of 10.
Yeah, they did it.
It's just,
yeah, and
it should be more well known.
Yeah, I'm surprised. And I'm from Nova Scotia where he's from, and we have this connection to it. I have never heard of it were it not for that press release from the police warning people about this guy being back in Nova Scotia. You said this is as a sadistic crime. One thing that makes it sadistic is the fact that this guy was willing to, this is the second time he'll be moving the body. He initially moved Trina's remains when he said it was the firearms he had to move. Now he has the skull with the plan of bringing that back to Nova Scotia. But the police also, they know the rough area where her body would have been. They eventually find the rest of her remains, and she was brutalized before death. It wasn't like she was, the death that whatever led to her death was horrible. She had broken legs. Her body was in horrible condition. So she met a brutal, violent death, has her body moved after death. Months later, her head removed. He's now arrested. Both are originally charged with murder, but Mary Kelly's charges would be dropped when she agrees to, when they learn her relationship with what her relationship was like with him, and she agrees to help the prosecution. So it's a slam dunk case. They have him with the head, Mary Kelly willing to say what happened. It is, in fact, at the time, one of the shortest jury deliberations in Canadian history, and he's found guilty.
Wow. I could have looked this up myself and I didn't. Is Mary Kelly still alive? Do we know?
I could not find an answer to that question. I wondered myself. This would have been, he's just he got, I'll say what he got. He was found guilty. I'm shocked that he didn't plead guilty. Why would you, with even what we just talked about?
He didn't?
How could you? No, he was found guilty by a jury. So they actually had a trial, and he's found guilty. He gets 25 years, like a life sentence. So 25 years in prison with no chance of parole for 23 years. So that's in Canada, that's a pretty harsh sentence. But I want to say one more thing before we continue the conversation is the documentary we've been playing the little clips from, and largely following the narrative from. The documentary is about Trina Campbell's murder. So it ends at this part of the story with him being found guilty and arrested, and it ends in a really interesting way. I want to play one of the final moments in the documentary is it describes how Doug was able to get out of prison after the first rape of the child and having his 8-year sentence. He comes back, he comes out of prison, kills Trina Campbell, but the documentary ends by talking how laws are tightened to prevent someone like Doug Worth from getting out again. Listen to this in considering how we started this episode with the police press release.
And there was a lot of controversy about the release of Doug Worth and controversy about what could have been done to protect the public. The system failed. We all deserve better protection than that.
In 1997, the criminal code was amended, giving authorities much stronger tools to keep the most dangerous high-risk offenders behind bars for good.
We didn't save Trina Campbell, but we certainly saved future Trina Campbells from Doug Worth.
So when this documentary was made in 1997, Doug Worth has gone to prison. We've tightened the laws. Something like this can't happen again. We're now talking in the year 2025, and I just want to again read the same statement we started with. Halifax Regional Police are advising citizens, particularly those in Dartmouth, that a high-risk offender resides in your community. Douglas Worth, who is now 73, is a federal offender who's been serving a life sentence for second-degree murder. The murder took place in Brampton in December of '87. Worth has a criminal history dating back to '68 that includes offenses of rape, break-and-enter, theft of motor vehicles, and a prison breach. Worth is bound by several conditions, including no contact with children or his victims, no drugs or alcohol, and all relationships must be reported. The release of this information is in accordance with the Nova Scotia Release of High-Risk Offender Information Protocol, and it's provided to alert members of the public of his presence and is not intended to encourage vigilante activity or any unreasonable conduct. So the way that documentary ends, it makes it seem like there's a system in place to prevent someone like him from getting out. I have a feeling the system isn't we release a press release to let the people know that he's living there. Like, what is this system and why is he back? He's only 73. He's still dangerous, right?
Oh, it doesn't matter how old he is. He'll always be dangerous. But I wonder if he's just like, if he's marked as high risk forever. Like, I don't know.
But what's the point of that? If being marked as high risk, that is probably what, if someone's high risk, it would justify sending these messages to notify a press release to notify the community. He has those conditions like no contact with kids, and he has to report, relationships and stuff. But I just feel like the guy who violently abducts and rapes an 8-year-old, murders a 12-year-old and removes her head and moves her body. 25 years is a long time, but not long enough that you change from that. It's people in Nova Scotia are terrified that this guy's living here, and I can see why.
Well, I can't imagine he's a super healthy 73. Like, he's probably a pretty hard 73, and
hasn't taken care of himself.
Yeah, hopefully he's like easily fought off. But yeah, it's just baffling how after all these years they couldn't somehow swing a dangerous offender title on him.
Yeah, you think if he didn't get it from the first crime that he served the 8-year sentence for, after Trina Campbell, seeing it as a trend, it seems like, he would have had to have done some serious rehabilitation while in jail to lead me to not think that there's a high risk that he'll do it again. But he's a high risk offender, so he didn't convince them that he wasn't going to do it again.
Right, and like, you don't rehabilitate someone like that. First, you can't cure psychopathy, and it's like his brain is wired different.
Yeah, but what do you do? Because it's like you can't keep them in Canada. You just can't lock them up and throw away the key. But I think in this case,
we should be able to.
Yeah, I would just like to know what I can, and I've not been able to find anything about this, but I'd be really interested to see what efforts were done to classify him as a dangerous offender, to give him um, an indefinite sentence and keep him in jail longer. Like if he's coming out at 73, 73 can be still like a man that's still in pretty good shape. If he was coming out at 82, maybe I'd be a
I,
little less concerned.
I would feel better if I would feel
Like I
better
say, I
if he
feel like
was
a
in an urn.
73 year.
But
Mm.
yeah, I don't know. It's just so hard to say. But you just said, we can't lock him up and throw away the key. Oh, we can. No. Look at Paul Bernardo. Look at Andrew Paul
Yeah,
Johnson.
that's true. And
Picton. I know he's dead now, but he was not coming out.
yeah, these were Bernardo is classified as a dangerous offender, and much like Doug Worth, Paul Bernardo had a documented history of like rapes that increased in violence to the point of
Right.
murder. And I think the line between like a Paul Bernardo and a Doug Worth, it's not a very big line.
No.
Paul Bernardo seemed to maybe just be a bit smarter, but I don't know if he was any more vicious.
It's hard to say. Paul Bernardo got away with it for longer because he was not to me, but he was conventionally good looking and charming and all that.
Mhm.
I can't believe he only got second degree murder though. Doug Worth.
Yeah,
He somehow proved or convinced them that this wasn't premeditated.
well, I wonder if he randomly grabbed her and he was going to do horrible things to her, but he didn't mean to kill her. Could that be
Yeah.
enough? Like
It's really, really hard to get someone on first degree
yeah,
without having a hand-drawn, plan mapped out. It's pretty
yeah.
hard to get someone on first degree.
And despite the case against him, he was willing to fight it because it did go to a jury's decision.
Right.
Whatever he had going on, if he wasn't arrested for the Trina Campbell murder, I'm sure there would have been others, probably down here in Nova Scotia,
Something.
if not
If not a murder,
beyond that. Because
something.
not only, yeah, because he also seemed to have some people around him that were willing to turn a blind eye. Or Mary Kelly was basically something that, there's going to be a question about what her role is and if she should have faced any kind of punishment. But she seemed to be something like an assistant to him. She helped him move the body twice,
Yeah. Well,
once
you never know.
successfully and once.
Had he gotten away with this murder, Mary Kelly could have been his next victim.
Oh, yeah, very likely.
It's such a tragic series of events that could have been
Yeah.
avoided.
Yeah. And a tragedy that Trina Campbell had to die. Also concerning that he is now out in Nova Scotia. And I think what this changes for me, for one, I'm learning about this story that has a connection to Nova Scotia that I didn't know about. But I think more than that is when I see these emails or press releases come out from the police warning of a high risk offender in your area, Google it. Because if they say high risk offender, it's probably way worse than that. And Doug Worth, like to say he's a high risk offender. Oh man, there's way more
They're
than that to it. There's way more to it than
they
that.
throw in a few hot button words. He's guilty of rape and murder, but as bad as that is on the surface, when you really know the whole story, it somehow is even worse.
I want to thank you for joining us for this episode. Let this all be a bit of a cautionary tale. When the police warn you that someone's going to be living in your area, there's probably a very, very good reason they're doing so. And the resulting Google search that you probably will do is going to give you chills. Stay safe out there. Now, with all that said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part, I have some thanks to give out. First, a big thanks to Madeline Klein for joining me for this episode, Monty Data, who contributes to the music for this show, and Linz from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides our intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to every one of you listening to the show. Without your interest and your support, what we're doing here would be as pointless as it would be impossible. On the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Brianna, Kay, and Ashley, we appreciate you. And for anyone else out there who'd like to support the show, You have a couple ways you could do it. A premium feed subscription costs just a couple bucks a month, and that money will fund the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those episodes 2 days early, give them to you ad-free, and give you access to a back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium by following the links in this episode's notes. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know they should listen. Your support is very much appreciated. And until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.
They may have taken into account his age and may have thought that he no longer poses a risk to the public or to reoffend. He may have also shown remorse and taken responsibility for his past criminal deeds, but that may be cold comfort for the people living near him in Dartmouth.